Welcome, everyone, to Narrative Dissonance on Unsafe Space. This is a show with bad intro music, but it's different bad intro music every single time. So you got that going for you. Today is Monday, April 4th. I'm Carter. This is a show that we host every Monday live at 11 a.m. Pacific time, where we question the mainstream narrative, bring a panel of people from outside the corporate media to tell us how we're being lied to. You can watch us on unsafespace.com. We always have our embedded live stream there, or YouTube, as long as we're not banned. Utreon, Odyssey, Rumble, we're all those places. We're also on Twitter at _unsafespace. Don't forget to share this content or any content you like here with a friend, and hit the subscribe button. That helps us out. You can always support us financially if you want by going to unsafespace.com. One quick announcement before we start the show. We had a book club. Our next book club book is Gulag Archipelago by Solzhenitsyn, but it was the abridged version, so you don't have to freak out too much, although it's still quite a tome. We moved the date to May 1st because Thomas St. Thomas, who is the guy running that book club, needed to move it. And frankly, a lot of people that were reading it were thankful for the extra week. So you got another week. It will be on May 1st. We'll do Gulag Archipelago. If you want to join that, just send an email to speak@unsafespace.com and or go to the Facebook Unsafe Space book club page and let people know. All right, let's get the show started. Again, welcome to Narrative Dissonance. Today we have I'm excited about these two guests because they are both red-pilled but come from different perspectives. So today, first, let's welcome Barbara Kay. Since 2003, Barbara has been a weekly columnist for the National Post. Since 2018, she's been a weekly columnist for Post Millennial. And since September 2019, a monthly columnist for the Epoch Times. She can correct me if that's changed. I don't know if any of that's new or there's new stuff to add. Barbara is the co-author of 4 books. Author or co-author of 4 books: a biology, a cultural memoir, a murder mystery, and most recently a collaboration with Linda Blade, whom we've also had on Unsafe Space in the past, on the destructive effect of trans activism on Canadian and international sport. You can follow Barbara on Twitter at BarbaraRK, or her website for her latest book, unsporting.com. Barbara, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Carter. I am going to correct you. I actually should have sent in a notice. I'm not writing for the Post Millennial now, but I am writing twice a month for Epoch Times, and pretty regularly now for the Western Standard Online. So that's my only update.
Okay, well, that's a good update. Well, welcome. And I'd like to bring our second guest on as well, Chase Matheson. Chase worked in the aerospace industry until he was abruptly fired for organizing the Wrong Thinking Open Tennessee rally in April 2020. But he refused to stand silent while so many of his fellow patriots were being censored, silenced, and bullied into keeping their political opinions to themselves. So he went on to found the Patriot Punk Network and has spent the last 2 years uncovering stories that the mainstream press ignores or misrepresents. You can visit patriotpunk.org to find him. Chase, welcome.
How are you?
I'm all right. How you doing?
Doing well. Thank you for having me on, and I appreciate that little intro. I'm actually in the process of moving my website to patriotpunknetwork.com. So
I should have said that. Okay.
Thanks. My bad. I didn't send you anything either. So
we'll put the new link in the show description. So let's kick it off, and maybe Barbara, I'll start with you. What's the most important story about which the mainstream media has misled people in the past week or so?
Oh, in the past, or
recently.
Okay, so I'm going to go. History. I'm going to go with one. Actually, I'm going to go with one that has been misleading both in the past and the present. But it's a Canadian story, but it's very big up here, and that is that some indigenous leaders have met with the Pope. They went to Rome to meet with the Pope this week, and we've had just a vast outpouring of stories about how the Pope has apologized to these leaders and to all indigenous peoples for the sins of the Catholic Church with regard to the residential schools, which for a century, that's where a good proportion of Native children were forced to attend. And there have been many reports of abuses at the schools. And so the Pope has apologized, as did his predecessor Pope, and the Pope is actually slated to come to Canada this year. However, the accusations against the Catholic Church, which are some of them extremely egregious, there is no evidence for whatsoever, and yet the media has been extreme in calling Canada, we're a genocidal nation. We're still a genocidal nation. That you're not allowed to talk about the residential schools with anything other than as if they were a horror story from first to last, and that there's all kinds of murdered and missing children. That's the narrative. It's the most misleading story, I would say, in Canada this week and beyond.
What's the goal with this narrative?
The goal of the seeking of apologies and of escalating the narrative. Well, some courageous scholars are not afraid to say that the more apologies you get and the more extreme the apologies, the more extreme the reparations. There have been millions and millions and millions of dollars passed over in reparations already for the alleged genocidal character of our, history with Indigenous peoples, which I do not characterize at all. I think that word is overused to begin with, but it's in this case, it's very far from the case that the residential schools had any purpose other than to integrate young people who otherwise would have had no future whatsoever, and whose families and communities were were practically starving because their means of sustenance was diminishing at a very rapid pace, and the fur trade was dying off, and all kinds of other reasons. But to give them language skills and the technical skills to enter into an industrial society. Otherwise, they would have literally died out. So the narratives around the residential schools are many of them fabricated, and very few of them open to proof, so that all we have is people's hearsay. But it's taken as absolute truth, and anybody that questions the narrative in any way, even though there's plenty of evidence to refute a lot of the allegations, is called now, the new thing now is to be called a genocide denier. I am called a genocide denier. And so are many scholars, some of whom have actually been fired from their academic posts for publishing research that is evidence-based.
Wow. I mean, so I guess, Chase, are you familiar with this story at all? Because I don't know anything about, I don't know.
No.
This is the first time I'm hearing.
Yeah, that's exactly where I am too. I've not heard anything about that.
It's
very different history. It's a very different history with Indigenous peoples in the United States. They do have a different history because, in fact, many Indigenous tribes were wiped out or so decimated, but also because the reservations, they're called reservations in the States and they're called reserves in Canada, are very close to cities, towns, so that people can work in the mainstream economy. In Canada, a lot of the reserves are so far north or so far off the beaten economic path that they're entirely dependent either on their own initiatives, making their own economy out of whatever is to hand, or handouts from the federal government, which is the federal government spends billions in support of but this whole thing about the residential schools missing, they allege there's thousands of missing and murdered children. There's been no evidence that any child has ever been murdered or even gone missing. The records are there. If people want to look at what scholars have turned up, it's more of a kind of it's like the transphobia thing. You're not allowed to bring up any piece of evidence or to say, well, but actually we do have the death records and there's nothing here to show that,
Right.
you're a bigot, you're a racist, you're a colonialist, So for Canada, that was a big story this week. And it hadn't even occurred to me that it should be a story that everybody can relate to in the United States as well. So I'm sorry, it is more local in the sense
No,
that
it actually is interesting because from at least from my perspective, we do have a different history. Although I'd actually maybe if you can, I want you to tease out of some of the differences there. But I think we have seen kind of a similar, they turn to history, they look at some things that are either questionable or maybe just, look, in the past, people warred over land and killed each other and did whatever. And
Well,
like, that's kind of how people functioned. And now here we are 200 years later, supposed to apologize for stuff that none of us alive did.
well, our prime minister not only apologized. What started last May was that some ground penetrating radar had discovered some soil disturbances at a British Columbia school where there had been a residential school, and immediately they seized on that and said, these are mass graves. They're unmarked. They were actually soil disturbances that at first it was unmarked graves, and then it was mass graves, which suggest mass murder. And without any corroboration or any evidence, no excavation, no nothing, our prime minister said, we have such a dark and shameful past. He lowered the flag. He lowered the Canadian flag for 5 months. And when 5 months, and when people said, when is the flag going up? He said, that'll be for Indigenous people to decide. So, he has declared Canada a genocidal nation, and he says it's an ongoing cultural genocide. He says that. So it's a very demoralizing issue, very demoralizing. But of course, it brings up the whole idea, and I'm sure Chase can speak to that, of when are you allowed to celebrate your own nationhood? How far back? If you keep going back, you'll find that every country in the world, every conquest is the nature of world history. And there were always people there before. Yes, they were conquered, but you can't undo that conquest or that settlement. And when people from a higher technical, when people who have the wheel and horses come into a place where there's no wheels and no horses, they obviously are going to have the advantage in terms of settling. And, they're not invading another nation because there was no such thing as a nation state. This is a larger philosophical question, historical question, but I'm talking too much. I'll turn it over to Chase.
No, it's interesting because I'm in the South where everyone is a racist or everyone's woke. There's no middle ground when it comes to the narrative that's being pushed. And we have the Trail of Tears runs through, and what happened to the Indigenous people was absolutely terrible. And like Christopher Columbus was not like a stand-up guy. He was not the guy you'd want babysitting your kids, but he was exactly what a conquistador would have been. He was an explorer. That's what those people did. Half of them died in the middle of the ocean somewhere, on the trip. And they've been mischaracterizing history almost, and I think it's deliberate in a way to trigger people, to create little arguments, to divide families, friends, co-workers, to make it easier to categorize people.
So, let's play. I don't want to necessarily play devil's advocate completely here, because I do think it's immoral to be blaming current people on past actions. Like, I think that's patently immoral. But is there, what's the history, for example, of these schools? And is it a history of I don't know Canada's history. Is it a history of coming in and stealing land and oppressing people and then having schools after that? What's the history in Canada? I assume it's
the history.
Similar.
Okay, so the history is not at all like what went on in Latin America in terms of conquering, massacring, none of that. The original settlers from New France, they were the first ones to come in the 17th century. They had pretty amicable relations with the Indians that they found because they pretty soon discovered that these people were fantastic hunters and trappers, and there was a gigantic market for furs in Europe. So they established a relationship pretty quickly. The native people did all the hunting and trapping. Then they would bring them to the Hudson's Bay Company. I don't know if you've heard of it, but that was
I have
kind
heard
of
of it. Yeah.
well, I mean, before there was even a proper government, there was a Hudson's Bay Company. Was the European? They set up. That was where they received the goods, but it was also they provided them with benefits, and they were a source. They would distribute food in times of hunger and that sort of thing. So yes, they became very dependent on the fur trade selling to Europeans, and in return, they gave them modern stuff. That's where they got weapons from for the first time. Obviously, they had never had guns before, so that they could hunt better. And so I wouldn't call it oppression, but it was definitely settling on lands that most of these people were quite nomadic. So you can't say that they didn't have cities or towns even. They had settlements or their own. So Canada is a very big country. So there was plenty of room for everybody. And in fact, there still is. It's the second biggest country in the world, and we have 38 million people. So to this day, 90% of Canada is unoccupied. So it wasn't so much a question of grabbing land, but of displacement, of the lands that they wanted, or that they were building towns. And it wasn't as if these people couldn't also be in those towns, but they didn't want to be. I don't want to go into. I don't have the whole history. What I can say is that massacring Canada was not in the business. The first Canadians were not in the business of massacring anybody, although there was some intertribal. There were some of the Indian tribes sided with the United States, with the revolutionaries. So then, yes, there was fighting between them and the loyalists who went to Canada. But I don't want to get into the weeds here. All I can say is that the native people did present a problem as the government formed and as we got a bigger country. They were behind. They were being left behind when the fur trade started to fall off and everything. The question was, what are we going to do for these people? Yes, they were treated as inferiors. Yes, they were treated as, because they were technologically behind and all of that. But the residential schools, actually, it was an idea that was conceived in the United States, and they were schools. There were schools in the United States, residential schools where American natives went to learn skills so that they could join the economy. That was the idea. They brought it back to Canada. It was a good idea. They let the church people run it. The 60% of them were run by the Catholic Church, and 40% were run by the Anglican Church. And they were given sort of carte blanche to run them. And they reported back to the Department of Indian Affairs. So within that system, obviously, with no accountability, yes, we know there were abuses, but on the scale that we're being told, no. And we have many accounts of grateful kids that went to that school. Their sisters and brothers came. Their parents were happy to send them. We have many, many accounts of, thank goodness I learned English. I learned this. One of our most famous artists, Thompson Highway, is a man who went to these schools for 8 years and wrote the most beautiful memoir. He's a famous poet and musician, world famous now, and he wrote a beautiful memoir thanking them. He got piano lessons at the residential school. Where was he get? His parents were like hunters, trappers. Where was he going to learn how to play the piano? And he thanked his teachers who were so dedicated. And Thompson Highway, you won't see his name appearing in a magazine article or writing in a newspaper, because he's considered like what do they call like the black conservatives. False consciousness. He's
sure. He's got internalized colonialism.
Exactly. Yeah, he's internalized. Yeah, so he doesn't get a lot of public airtime or any really. So I'm obviously leaving out a lot, and I'm not trying to make it better than it was, and I'm not trying to make it worse than it was. But I don't know what other way there could have been other than some kind of forced acculturation in order to give these people a chance to enter. Otherwise, they were going to be left out. And, they say, oh, it was cultural genocide. Well, can you imagine living off the land today? Like what kind of a life you would give a child, in the North, hunting and trapping? That would be your life? I don't think so. It's not a good life.
It's that timely debate of trying to justify ethical decisions made in a time that you can't comprehend what was going on.
Yeah, it's presentism. It's presentism.
Yes.
Yeah, and there's also what's reminding me. This is reminding me of this trend to, and I don't know if this is just Disney did this generally, but like this. Well, I mean, it's Rousseau did it, right? And it starts with this romanticization of what it's like to not have the modern era and the conveniences, as if this is an equivalent. Oh, well, this is just an equivalent culture. Like the word culture means a lot of things. It can mean morals, which I would argue there are better morals than others. Like a culture, for example, where you sacrifice your firstborn baby to the sun god every year for a good harvest that's a bad moral culture, like bad morals. Yeah. That's a bad aspect of the culture. And other things are like, well, this kind of music or this kind of art or this kind of food, like those cultural things are kind of irrelevant. But we're asked to look at these cultures as if they're completely equivalent. Like, oh, well, it would have been just as fine for the people involved for this, I forgot his first name, but Thompson Highway. It would have been perfectly fine for him to have remained living off the land and only learn trapping and whatever, and that would have been an equivalent life. But really, if you look at it from his perspective, Western culture had more to offer for him in his personal self-satisfaction and his self-actualization, and he learned piano and decided he wanted to go do other things, and closing that door because you've decided to vilify one side and say, well, these are equivalent cultures. You shouldn't want to be in your other culture, or you shouldn't want to try this other culture. You should stick with this culture. I don't. There's this equivalent. There's a cultural equivalence that's really bothersome to me. You can respect
multiculturalism. That's what multiculturalism is.
Yeah, I guess. But it's usually presented as just appreciation for, which I can have appreciation for other cultures. It's the moral equivalence of a culture where you don't have wheels and guns or medicine or schools or written languages is not equivalent to a culture where you have those things. I mean, by any metric that you would measure, you've got better standards of livings, happier people. Like,
think about a culture that doesn't have internet access right now.
Right.
That's how far behind are they? Whereas, my family, they shop on Amazon. They have their groceries delivered to their front door, got the Ring doorbells, all the fancy. Their life is on the internet. Compare that to someone who lives even in rural Tennessee, where you don't have any high-speed internet, so they've made do without it, or in one of these African countries that in the rural areas of that doesn't have access to the internet. How dramatically different is life from how you plan your trip to the grocery store or how you're planning your next meal, all the way. And that is going to create a completely different subculture. And if you went to an area that doesn't have internet, somewhere they have to plant and harvest their food, how many of them you think would like to sign up for Amazon grocery delivery?
Right.
Most of them.
But it's not just material, Chase. I mean, look, all of us come from, I don't know about your ancestors, but mine lived in Europe. They had a very different culture from the way I live. Everybody else accepts the fact that cultures evolve. And you can't, what they seem to be saying about their culture is that they would have liked it to be fixed in amber or something, that the only authentic culture is one that never changes. But every immigrant that comes to our shores changes their language. Yeah, sure, they speak their old language at home, but maybe their kids won't even speak the old language. Well, times move on, and it doesn't mean they forget where they came from, but it means something else. When you add that other layer, and you come here and you integrate. I mean, that's to me, that's the
Yeah.
ideal, is that you integrate into the new culture. If you have a religion, that you keep that. I mean, that's, you bring your religion from somewhere else, great, practice it. But it's not a genocide when you go to schools in the new place. And I remember when I was a kid, I'm Jewish, and we all sang Christmas carols. Is that cultural genocide? I mean, nobody ever wanted to know what we sang at home. It was like we had joined this new, the only public schools, they were all Christian. They weren't Christian in
paper, but in practice.
Policy. But I mean, that was everybody in those days. So it was very natural to sing Christmas carols at Christmas time. We never thought that was like, oh, they hate us. They want our culture to die out. We were Jewish at home, and in the schools, we did what all the other kids did. Now
it becomes someone's individual responsibility or family responsibility to preserve the culture. And inevitably, the number of families willing to preserve things over time will decrease. And that's a fact. And it's like you said, nothing's preserved in amber. I mean, other than some mosquitoes with dinosaur DNA.
Right. Yeah. I was going to say, haven't you seen Jurassic Park? I like the way you're describing culture, though, because you're right. It is something that does change over time. And the idea of freezing something static and being upset that it's not still static is just kind of stupid. I mean, I always think of what would happen if I moved to Japan. It's like, well, I would adopt Japanese culture, not because I was forced. And I do think forcing people to do things obviously is wrong, but not because I was forced. But if I wanted to get along and get a job and not be ostracized and fit in with the neighbors, like, I'd have to.
For sure, you'd learn the
things.
language. For sure, you'd learn the language, wouldn't you? I mean, or you'd make sure your kids learn the language. And the fact that Native people had to learn a language that was not their own in order to survive, they would have to admit that they are a conquered people, and that's how it is. But there's no shame in your grandparents having been conquered. You can't keep blaming. You can't keep blaming the grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren of the people that conquered your great-great-great-grandparents. You can't forever be saying you're genocidal or you're white supremacists or you're whatever it was that happened to get us into this pickle now. The blame game cannot go on forever. It's corrosive and divisive. And I honestly think that this demand for constant apologizing and reparations, it doesn't help the people that consider themselves the victims. It reinforces the idea that self-pity is itself a viable attitude to take forever. Like, and instead of saying what happened to us, we consider very bad, but we're moving on. We're moving on, and that's it.
Yeah, and I think it would in a reasonable world, all people would look back at history and say, "Wow, people in history did some bad things to each other, and these people did these bad things, and these people had these bad ideas, and these people did this bad thing." And like, okay, but we all need to move on.
Add, you just sparked. I'm sorry, Chase. I feel I'm
No, you're fine. I'm really intrigued because I don't know a whole lot about indigenous Canadian history, so I'm just trying to listen. You're well spoken.
Okay, I'm sorry though. I don't like to hog the but what you said sparked me to remember the fact that I had read about in Mexico. If you walk through the streets of Mexico and you meet Mexicans, you won't know which Mexican is the great grandchild of a Spaniard or of an indigenous, what were they called? I forget. Whatever. The indigenous people of Mexico. They intermarried, they interculturated, and now it's like everybody's just Mexican. And that's what should have happened. And it would have happened if our natives had not, well, in concert with the government, I don't know, whose idea it was first, but if they had not insisted on their own reservations or reserves, it's true that
they focused on the differences instead of trying to blend together and not caring about what religion or what tribe or skin color or whatever it was. They found a way to divide people, probably for profit.
Well, now it has actually, a lot of people speak about the indigenous industry. It's because there is profit in apologies, and there is profit in blame, and there is profit in performative grieving over unmarked graves that nobody even knows if they are unmarked graves and how they died, or if they are graves, if they died of tuberculosis, or so.
So no one's gotten a shovel yet, just to be clear. That's still
no excavation,
Oh,
and they've had lots of time, and they were given 71 million. No, I'm sorry, not 71. $71 million was what they were given to do this whole commission of truth and reconciliation. And they were also given money to do No, there's been no excavation. There's been not a single body found. There has never been a single parent that ever complained, like a written complaint, that their child never came home from the school. There's never been a single investigation. There's never been a single police report. Nothing. Zero. Wow. And yet all these accusations, there's an accusation out there that the Queen and Prince Philip kidnapped 12 Aboriginal children and took them home to England with them. There are crazy.
I've heard that. Yep. I've heard that.
That's one of them, that children were burned in the furnaces. Babies were thrown into the children born to illegitimate, that the priests fathered children, and they were burned in furnaces. You can't imagine the terrible accusations. And there hasn't been a single iota of proof to any of them. But the minute you say, gee, that sounds terrible, maybe, are you sure that happened? Oh, you're a residential school denier, which is the kind of word that you use with the Holocaust, right? I mean, that's not a word that you use lightly.
Yeah. And climate change. All right, this has been fascinating, but I want to give Chase a chance to answer the question. What do you think the most important story about which we've been misled is in the past?
I mean, I hate to point out the elephant in the room, but the Ukraine-Russia situation. I mean, obviously that's been going on for years now, but you can go back just 4 or 5 years at the news articles where they point out that there's a neo-Nazi problem in Ukraine. It's the most corrupt thing ever. Republicans and Democrat politicians both have family members earning jackpot loads of money. They're the #1 donor for the Clinton Foundation, which we all know is the most above board organization on earth. And I don't know anything about Hillary Clinton.
I'm not suicidal.
Yes, I'm not suicidal. There's no dental floss in my jail cell. But Ukraine is corrupt. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm a pro-Putin guy. You can't get honest information. We all know that the media, I don't want to say all, but a lot of us 4 or 5 years ago thought that America was the only place, maybe Canada too, I'm not familiar with y'all's culture, that had honest media. And now, if you think anywhere has honest media, then I've got some oceanfront property here in Tennessee to sell you. So, there's Zelensky came out and banned 10 political parties, I believe it was, like last week. He did not ban the Nazi Party. There's a lot of things that I think it was 2017, the New York Times was running articles where the Nazi movement in Ukraine was using cluster bombs on its own people. So it's hard to know what to believe, but it's obvious that we've been misled. So I would like to ask you guys why.
I actually have seen reports that Ukraine is quite a corrupt country. I don't think that honest journalists deny that. At the moment, when you're up to your neck in alligators, it's hard to think about that your original intention was to drain the swamp. So, right now, there's a lot of alligators around Zelensky, so it seems a little harsh, especially the news reports of the last day with the war crimes that the Russians have been
Accused of.
they're just terrible,
Yeah.
terrible. And, in his present situation, Ukraine stands for a lot more than just Ukraine. It stands for a kind of a European ideal and democracy. I mean, the idea of being a free country and all that. It might be a lousy democracy, but it's still a democracy.
Well, I think that's the narrative that they're spinning, but it's in no way it's a corruptocracy. It's like Gotham City. Like the only thing it's missing is Batman and a guy in a question mark outfit. And
but you don't want to see it. But you don't want to see Putin win.
Well, no, you don't want to. But because I've got friends who are Ukrainian. Their parents are Russian because their parents are old enough to be alive when Ukraine wasn't a country. But they absolutely they believe more of the Russian media than what we see. They believe that a lot of the Ukrainian sub-factions are doing this to themselves. It's like warring gangs killing people, and Russia becomes the easy clickbait. For the first 2 weeks of it, they had all this BS propaganda, fake news articles, fake staged cutouts of people, fake guns in the pictures, and that you were being shown by MSNBC. It's just like at the start of the COVID pandemic when they were using the inflatable people, the fake dummies in the background to show overstaffed hospitals. And the appearance of impropriety is worse than impropriety itself. I in no way am trying to justify because I don't even know who's doing it. I obviously believe that Russia is there and is committing atrocities, possibly, but is it really Russia on orders committing atrocities, or is it, 3 drunken people that are going to 3 drunken soldiers that have gotten ticked off, like we have U.S. Marines get accused of this all the time in Afghanistan, treating the native people.
What they found yesterday was in the news today. I don't think there's any question that this town of Bucha has been terrible war crimes have been committed, and they did find a mass grave. I actually believe that the Chechens, who are most loyal to Putin, will do just about anything. They are known for their brutality.
Mm-hmm.
And look, the bombing of the maternity hospital that put out a big sign in front, children, and got bombed anyways. You're not saying that's fake?
I'm not saying that they didn't get bombed. I'm saying that how do you know it was ordered by this person? How do you know that and I'm not saying that, again, I don't trust the mainstream media, and I have friends. My dad came over here in 87 from England, so I have a lot of friends that live all over Europe, older friends, and I am not sympathizing with Russia, but what's going on right now with the Ukrainian, the biolabs. Are you aware of the biolabs?
Yes, I have read that story. Yeah.
Yeah. There's video all over the alternative social media where the Russian troops are letting people flat out leave, but they're checking them for Nazi insignia first, because now again, do I think that is what the entire war's over? I don't know. But if you believe CNN, when CNN, MSNBC, Fox, when they're all singing the same tune, if you still trust that, I'm sorry. Then I don't know what to tell you. But
I think that if you're kind of aware of Putin's own words over the last 15 years or so, he's a guy who has a mission. He's on a mission to restore Russia to its former czarist glory. I think he's definitely in charge in that country. So,
And
yeah.
how would we react as America? Obviously, you're in Canada. If we found out that China was building biological weapons labs in Canada,
Actually, we have a there's
do you
a
have
story.
Chinese biological? If so, then oh man, please.
We just kicked out, not just a few months ago, 2 Chinese biologists were kicked out of Canada suddenly, very abruptly, with no fanfare, and the news sort of went dark on why. And so far, I think something is going on, but I don't know what. But everybody, but there's people should be paying attention to that story because.
So I'm a big fan of the Hegelian dialectic, and I can believe Russia is a bad guy, but that doesn't mean that I have to believe Ukraine is the good guy. The citizens of Ukraine absolutely are the victims. I 100%, I believe that they are the end. But then again, so are most of the soldiers having to fight for Russia. They signed up just like our boys in camo
Well,
do.
They were duped. I don't
And
think any of them
and
knew what they were getting into. And
but
he won't allow anybody to call it a war. In Russia,
yeah.
he calls it a special military operation or special, and anybody that actually says out loud that it's a war, they can get into trouble for that. So,
Yep. And
look, I think Putin's a pretty evil guy. It doesn't matter to me, in fact, if Ukraine is corrupt or not corrupt. It does have it has enough of the earmarks of a country that's trying to be part of the West for us to be cheering it on. And what has happened is an invasion very much on par with Hitler's invasion of Poland. It's a made-up reason, and we are being taken back to the times we thought were over. World War, like where countries just decided, I'm sorry that country got away from us 20 years ago. We're taking it back. Like you can't do. We thought the new global order was you don't do that anymore, but now it's being done, and
so
it's very important that they don't win. It's very important that Russia doesn't win.
So what do you have to say then when Zelensky's on audio recently saying he is fighting for the new world order? I can get you that.
To me what if he says he's want to be part of that. The new world order, I agree. I'm sure we can all agree that it's a little creepy. But what he's really saying is he wants in with the West. He wants.
I think it's a money laundering thing. Again, I don't think that Putin's a good guy, but within like 2 days of the first bombing, the gas station down the road from me was asking if I wanted to donate round up to the nearest dollar and donate money to the Ukrainian relief effort. And
well, they do need relief. Come on, they've got like 3 million refugees pouring out, trying to, and I think you're being tough on. Ukraine. I have to push back here, Chase.
Wait. Okay. Let me moderate for a second.
Yes.
Let me
Carter.
just step back for a second because, look, I don't have philosophically, I'm an anarchist. I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't care. I think governments, all of them are horrible. I would much prefer a libertarian government, so I'm kind of on their side generally than so I push for that, but I think, ultimately, and when I say I'm an anarchist, it means because I can't figure out a good way to do government. Like if someone could figure out a way to do government that wasn't a violation of individual rights, I might be on board, but I'm pretty black-pilled with respect to how the Constitution's been ignored and that didn't work. And so
yes.
I don't really know what to do next, but I do know smaller and smaller and smaller with a limit to approaching zero would be good for me. So I don't want to defend Putin. I don't want to defend Zelensky. I don't want to defend the US. So when I look at this, I see we're in the information. I hate this sounds trite, but we're in an information age where this is really going to be about an information war. And the Russian people and the Ukrainian people are, I mean, Ukrainian people much more so, are victims of this. And the person who will win the actual war knows, the entity that will win the actual war knows that they will win it through information. And we know that Russia pushes disinformation. We know the Russian military has been pushing disinformation. We know, I think the narrative of the Russia-Trump 2016 thing was obviously crazily overblown. They spent like a few tens of thousands of dollars on Facebook.
Every major developed country pushes disinformation.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, but it's a hot war, Carter. It's a hot war.
No, I know. But let me finish. So I'm just a normal guy. I'm not there in Ukraine. Yeah. I don't speak Ukrainian. I don't speak Russian, and I'm not there with my iPhone filming stuff. So I especially over the past few years, as I've watched the COVID narrative unfold, I've grown even more distrustful of what our mainstream media is telling us. And then I watch, when this war happens, they do things like take down Oliver Stone's documentary, Ukraine on Fire, so that people can't talk about it. You see the New York Times go after Candace Owens for saying something about Nazis in the Ukraine. And they said, where did you get that information? And she said, here. And she pointed to their articles from a few years ago, right? There's been a shutdown of discussion. And whenever there's a silencing of discussion and nuance, that is a red flag for me. And so I immediately think, I don't know whose information to believe. I believe that he's there. I believe that he invaded. I believe the Ukrainian people are suffering. All that's true. How much war crime and atrocity is happening on either side, I don't know. I do know there are Nazis in Ukraine. This was true before. It was reported before. There's an entire battalion. The whole history of Ukraine politics is, I made a little crazy diagram with people related to each other and the CIA supporting people. Like, it is very, keep in mind, in Europe, Nazi is non-communist. So when the Soviet Union broke up, well, and actually even after World War II, the CIA was involved in hiding Nazis because because Nazis were suddenly communism became the threat, and the leaders that we were anti-communist, which happened to be Nazi, like, did actually get hidden by the US.
They did bring Nazis over from Germany who had participated in the war. They did come to the United States. They did work at scientific stuff.
A lot of the war criminals went to Argentina also.
That is true.
Right. So I'm not saying, I guess what I'm frustrating is kind of, I'll say I'm a normie in this case because I don't, like I said, I don't speak Ukrainian, I don't speak Russian. I'm not massively familiar with the history and all the nuance, but I don't know what to believe. And I think it's hard for average people to know what to believe when they say Russia bombed this hospital. I don't even know that that's true. Do I believe the hospital was bombed? Yes. Do I know it was Russia? I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know. We had people saying,
you guys are in a different planet from me.
Okay,
I'm not
so
there.
why should I believe it?
They bombed it, and I saw evidence good enough for me.
Okay. What was the evidence that it was Russia specifically that you saw?
All right, look, maybe we should move to another topic because
okay. I'm just saying as a like, you know, maybe you're more involved in this than I am. I'm not
more involved. I read the Wall Street Journal. I mean, if you don't believe them, you know, that's mainstream, but it's good enough for me. And I'm reading articles in Substacks and I'm reading all kinds of stuff and that are analyzing different aspects of the war. These are a lot of them brilliant writers, and a lot of them are military people that really know what they're looking at. They know the materiel, they know who's got what and who's. So I can't even discuss it. I mean, you're
okay.
skeptical in a degree that
I'm too skeptical.
You're way
okay
off my planet. Okay.
So let me ask you this then. And just again, maybe I am too. I mean, look, maybe I'm too skeptical. Certainly, I do feel like I've been lied to for a while on COVID and everything else. But if we rewind to the Iraq War or Afghanistan, a lot of the things that these are the same people telling us, the same experts explaining to us what was happening and what was going on. And a lot of that turned out to be false. The yellow cake stuff was false. The taking babies out of incubators and beating them on the floor, that atrocity was false. Like, we now know, and we seem to have a very short attention span. We seem to be like, well, yeah, they were wrong about that, but I'm going to go back to the same trove of experts and ask them about Ukraine and Russia. And so I've lost my trust in even a lot of people that I would say in the past I might have said, well, I like the Wall Street Journal better than the New York Times, and so, I'm going to believe what they say, right?
Okay, but this if you're going back to Iraq, the trove of information that they thought they had, I think a lot of it they honestly believed because they thought they had good reason to believe it. Saddam Hussein himself was putting out the idea that he was boasting that he had weapons of mass destruction because he wanted people to be scared. I mean, he was the one that lied the most about it. His own generals believed him. They thought that he did have chemical weapons. Maybe he did, and they, were spirited out of the country. I don't know, but okay. I think there's no black and white on these things. I think that it was the aftermath of I think there was a lot of argument in favor of getting rid of Saddam just because he was a wider threat than just to Iraq. If he'd stayed in power, he had already attacked Israel. He was looking forward to attacking some more with bigger and better weapons. Same as Iran. I think what's going on in Iran with this deal for Iran is so insane. That's what I can't believe, is that the United States is making such a bad deal with Iran, who's, I believe, when a leader says, when I have a nuclear weapon, I'm going to wipe out this country. I tend to believe them, because why would you say that if you didn't, like Putin said he was going to get Ukraine back because he believes that Ukraine is really part of Russia spiritually. So I don't think it's so crazy that he was one day going to do it, and he did it. I think he waited till Trump was out of power because he wasn't so sure how Trump would react. Right. He was more unpredictable. But then he thought he could get away with it. So I think we could go around all this stuff. I'm not sure.
There's another story that hasn't been covered very much in the media.
Okay.
Hunter Biden's laptop.
Oh, now that is interesting, because right from the beginning, it sounded tremendously plausible to me. And the guy that went on, what's his name?
Bobulinski?
Tony Bobulinski? That guy?
Yep.
And I have left-wing friends who adamantly rejected that this could be possible.
Oh, uh-oh. YouTube doesn't want Barbara talking about Hunter Biden's laptop. Look at that. Oh, there you go. You froze, but you're back. You froze after I have friends. And that was the end.
I have friends that they actually believe the Hunter Biden thing was disinformation from Russia, and they adamantly refused, because all, CNN, all the usual suspects were saying that throwing, shade on it and saying, no, it's not, there's no evidence here. There's a blah, 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 blah. That was one thing. I thought, I wasn't skeptical for 1 second. I thought, oh no, this is for real. And when it turned out to be for real, it was only the Wall Street Journal, by the way, that harped on that and never for a second said that it wasn't real. Of all the mainstream newspapers,
New York Post and
the New York Post, yeah.
Gateway Pundit.
But the ones like up at the New York Times level, it was the Wall Street, to me, is like the New York Post. I like it because it's in your face, and it's snazzy and it's jazzy. But the Wall Street I like for the fact that it's conservative, but in a very sober kind of way. So I think their columnists are terrific, and they've never had to backtrack on anything so far. So the New York Times, there's 100 things. They should just have a booth out in front of the building, handing out refunds, for the paper, for you, what you paid for. You should get your money back for all the times they've been wrong.
So the Hunter laptop story, the thing that's, I think, so frustrating is there were polls taken after the election in 2020, which clearly indicate that if the voters had known about this story, Biden would not have won.
I think 10% of Biden voters said that if they had known that was a true story, they would not have voted for him.
That would have been plenty to right. That would have been plenty to sway the election. I know there's going to be people saying he didn't win, and let's not get into that. But like he wouldn't have won. And isn't it convenient that we were told that this story was suppressed right beforehand, and now
there's no question that the left-wing media suppressed that story. I'm with you on that. They suppress a lot of stuff. But what's good about today is you've got a vast array now of wonderful writers who've left mainstream media. They've got their own Substacks. They can write what they want. They're not censored. They can't be censored. It's not a veil of tears altogether on journalism because it's evolving. And, I'm thinking about Barry Weiss, who left the New York Times, and she's making tons more money running her Substack, and Andrew Sullivan and
Glenn Greenwald.
Oh yeah, there's so many of them. I like Jonah Goldberg, but he's always been off. He's had for years his own blog. So it's not like you can't get alternate points of view. You can.
You can, but you have to know where to look. I will say I had my business page, like my news page, taken down when I went to DC. I had less than 500 followers on that page at the time. And I asked them to review, and they said, no, we reviewed it and we're standing by our decision. Like, and it seemed like someone had personally responded. It was not an automated email. It was somebody went. And
what was there something specific? Was it COVID or
I was on a bus going to January 6th, the rally beforehand. We took 3 buses up there. And nothing, no one did anything illegal, but they took me down just for talking about that. I had my payment processors cancel me through Wix website because I was selling a shirt. Now, I sell t-shirts, and I sold one with a letter of the alphabet on it because it sold well. I don't have to believe something to sell it. But you know what letter of the alphabet that is, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And they canceled me on my website. And my website, I was selling like $400 or $500 a month worth, like really small amount. So they will target the small person a lot more than we think they are. They will, from shadow banning to, so people, if you see something that's gotten 1 million views on Facebook, chances are there's nothing juicy in there. That's what Project Veritas can't even get 1 million views.
Well, that does actually feed into the story you thought you were going to hear from me about the Freedom Convoy in Canada. Okay. And they sure did try to do a number on them. Our prime minister, as you know, is quite left-wing, and he just hated the truckers. He didn't call them deplorables, but I think that in his mind they were diesel deplorables. And they planted story. The media were saying, oh, there's weapons caches. There's violence. There was none. The violence was coming from Antifa, who would come in at night and mess around, do vandalism and stuff. And then they wouldn't report that it was Antifa that had done the vandalism. It was a mess. And then the GoFundMe, they stopped payments, they froze people. They brought in the Emergencies Act for no good reason whatsoever. And
I went to Niagara Falls
about
a month ago, probably longer than that. But yeah, so I remember when they were doing all of that.
Well, there was the one in Ottawa that was at the borders. The border situations were different from what was going on in Ottawa with the honking and they downtown and disrupting because of the noise. That was the main problem was the noise for people. And for that, they brought in an Emergencies Act, which is usually only used in time of war, if you're being like invaded, and they had remarkable powers. The banks all cooperated in a second. They didn't even ask questions. It was the most draconian imposition of anti-democratic clampdown on freedoms that we've seen in a very long time in this country. It's only been used once or twice before. This is not the same as the War Measures Act, but it's an outcropping and a different one, but it has the same basic powers. Anyways, that's it. That would have been a good subject to discuss. But instead you got the indigenous stuff. Sorry.
No. I mean, I think it was good. I know you have a hard stop, right, Barbara?
I sort of do. I'm running a little bit late for another appointment.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't realize this was so open-ended. I thought it was an hour.
We're always crazy and open-ended. So, but it's fine. We also don't have, we can stop at an hour. So it works. So, remind people, give us one last comment you want as a takeaway, and then remind people where they can find you.
Oh, okay. Well, you can find me at my website, which is barbarak.ca. You can find me on Twitter, Barbara RK. I normally, a lot of my time has been spent on with my friend Linda Blade on this the transgender issue in sport. That's been one of my main things. But I'm a freedom of speech in the academy. Academic freedom is one of my main gigs, and I do a variety of subjects. I write for the National Post is my main gig. So I'd be very happy to, hear from anyone who's watched and has a comment, and welcome new readers. And thanks so much, Carter, for having me on. Chase, fun to meet you.
Yes, fun to meet you too. Yes,
I can see that we cross over a certain way.
That's the only way you find truth is through debate. Exactly.
And civil debate, which I enjoy on your program. So thanks so much for having me. Sorry to check out when it's
No, this is great, Barbara. Well, I'm sure we'll have you back. Maybe we'll get to talk about truckers next time, and maybe there'll be another dystopian display from your prime minister that we can.
Oh, you can count on it with our prime minister.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Barbara.
Okay. See you next time.
See ya. All right, Chase, tell people where they can find you. We can keep talking if you want, but since she just said where they can find her.
Yeah.
Where can people find you? How can they follow you?
So patriotpunknetwork.com is my most recent website. I'm trying to get more mainstream. My social links are on there, but if you look up Telegram, Minds, or Twitter, the Patriot Punk hashtag, you will find me. Most of the time it's Patriot Punk Network, but Twitter has a cap on characters. So, but all my links are at patriotpunknetwork.com. And my specialty is basically wearing a gasoline suit and bringing matches. So, that's
so I wanted to ask you both this question. I'm just going to ask you this question because Barbara's gone and I still want to know the answer. What news story should we be paying attention to right now?
Well, man, so there's two. One is actually a real local issue that it should concern everybody, but the more international issue is going to be Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson went on vacation. For those of you who don't know, he is a British activist fighting some of the immigration issues that they have. Whether or not you have a pro Tommy Robinson or an anti Tommy Robinson opinion, he went on a family vacation with a friend and his kids, and he was separated at the airport, detained and deported. And when he got back to England, the police are harassing him, and it's all because he's doing a documentary exposing what he calls the rape of Britain. So
Now, he's on vacation in Mexico with his family. What's the alleged crime? Why would he be
No,
detained
so
in the
it's he was detained upon entry
Oh,
and
trying to
Britain
go on vacation.
trying to go on vacation once he got there, and the British government deemed him national security threat, so they deported him back.
Oh,
So I
wow.
don't know, and I don't
So
know.
Mexico was like, we don't want you here. You're too much of a threat.
Yes, yep, and it's because he's politically active,
Wow.
and that's Mexico is our southern border. England, I'm a dual citizen. I'm actually my family's from England. So this is a
You
lot
have the English
closer.
accent, so I figured that was the
Yeah, no, that's I unfortunately that's not hereditary. So but this has major implications. Just like the seizing of Canadian truckers' assets and GoFundMe accounts has a precedence. This is direct proof of them targeting a mainstream individual. And they're doing it on a local level too. I don't know exactly where you're based out of, but I promise you.
I'm ashamed to say that it's California, but
well, I'm surprised that you aren't in a gulag yet.
the SWAT team's on their way.
Okay. Yep. I actually have had that conversation with my member of my local SWAT team, telling her what that is, just in case, because there's some crazy people in this world.
Yeah.
So, but the same thing's happening locally. I know some women who were actually assaulted at an election commission meeting. And we're about to come out with the story, but they're, no media outlet in the entire state would pick the story up.
Yep.
And it's going to cost them upwards of $20,000 just because they decided to get involved. And that has a precedence. That's, we already know there's not a lot of money in YouTube streaming, so
I'm well aware. Yes.
Yeah. So what's the motivation for independent journalists to be a journalist if they can be beat up and sued? I just,
Yeah, this is why the politics, to me, even though it's fun to talk about politics, it's sometimes like we really need to change our culture, because if this is if regular people are going to be this willing to pick up a pitchfork and crucify someone because someone else screams at them and points, this is, we're dead. I mean, you can't survive. Like a country like that can't survive. A culture like that can't survive. And the Tommy Robinson thing bothers me a lot, because we saw Australia, for COVID reasons, keep Novak from competing, but we also saw, I think was it Lauren Southern and Stefan Molyneux a few years ago? I think one or both of them got kicked out or wasn't allowed in because they were wrong thinkers and on some list. I think it was prior to COVID. You're seeing, Mexico refused Tommy Robinson. There's this really scary thing where I think part of me has always imagined, well, if things get really bad, I'll move to blankety blank. I'll escape to, I'll go to Angola. Well, I don't know, where Antigua. I'll go somewhere.
Yeah.
I'll
but only if you've had your booster.
Right. They do control the borders in the US. To leave. I don't know if you need a passport to leave, but I think you need a passport to leave because you're going somewhere. So, there is you can't leave the US without proposing to enter another country, and therefore you need a passport. So that means that the US has complete control over whether or not you can leave the country, because they can just deny you passports. And it's I don't know if people know this, but you can be denied a passport for non-payment of taxes if you owe a certain amount of taxes. And so, of course, if they want to do that, they can slap fines or other stuff on you. And then if you don't pay them, they deny your passport. Like, they can lock you in this country. I'm sure they can do it in the UK, and they can do it elsewhere. And I don't think we're that far away from it being, clearly we're not that far away from it being done for wrongthink because they're doing it to Tommy
already
Robinson.
it's already being done for wrongthink, but only if you're really, really important in the wrong thinkers. Only if you're a chief wrong thinker. But we're not far away from it happening to, hey, sorry, you committed a social justice violation. You can't change your gender for 30 days. Like we're the metaverse, the Matrix. Like it sounds all dystopian and crazy, but think about 100 years from now, 4 or 5 generations into the metaverse. I mean, you can't even fathom the control that could come down.
Yeah.
So
and the technology now exists for governments to implement the dystopia that we only read about in science fiction novels in the past. And there's not much stopping them. And one of the things that I didn't say, Barbara didn't want to talk too much about the war in Ukraine. I think we are on very different pages there with respect to at least my trusting of the media. I mean, I've also, started to research things from Putin's perspective. Again, not that I'm an apologist, but to understand, like, there are
the NATO agreement.
There's other things at play. There's a history of Russia being invaded. Like, part of Russians' culture is paranoia about being invaded, because Moscow was routinely invaded. Like, there's just there's an authoritarian streak in Russian culture. There's just a lot of, there's a lot of stuff to consider. But I look at this and I think, well, COVID really advanced the globalist agenda, and war is just another great thing. It's not even a war here, but still, you're seeing Pete Buttigieg, smirk about, well, you're gonna have to get an electric car if you want to not pay. Like, this is just another
it's a way for them
to control us through.
It's a way for them to speed up. They've built the infrastructure. They've spent 60 years developing the red tape, and some of it probably happened by accident. Once you have that many irons in the fire, sometimes you roll a few good rolls. And with social media, all the data mining, they have literally every piece of information. They understand human behavior better than anyone in the history of the world. And they have it at their fingertips. So they are able to control I don't know. You have Facebook, I imagine, still. Have you got caught on those reels? Like
I have it, but I never post. I don't even look at it. I don't pay attention to it.
So they've got this new feature now, and whatever brainwashing control they've worked, if you click on one, you are stuck watching that for 20 minutes, scrolling through, because they figured out human behavior and exactly how long something needs to be. And it's obvious, but how much of that is being used in our nightly news or in our,
all the time. I'm sure. Yeah. And that's the thing. We've reached a point where the algorithms know us better than we know ourselves. In fact, I think I don't remember the specifics of this. It could be apocryphal, but I don't think so. I think there have been instances of people getting served advertisements for being pregnant before they knew they were pregnant. Like, their behavior had changed or whatever, and it was like, oh, we think you're pregnant, and like they start getting served ads. Certainly, if it's, I think that's a little bit Minority Report sounding to me, so that it feels apocryphal just saying it out loud. But definitely, they anticipate your next move. They kind of know what you're about to like.
They eavesdrop on your conversations too, 100%. And show you things. If you mention the right keyword, white picket fence, 10 minutes later, you're going to see white picket fence installation, $4.99 or whatever it is. And it's scary, because what kind of things do you say on the phone, or when you're talking to your kid? What kind of words do you say that trigger an algorithm response and therefore control what news you see? Or
I'm not. So that's the thing with some of this stuff. Like, I understand the tech of how a lot of this stuff works. I understand cookies sit around, and I get served ads based on stuff I've looked at. And look, as someone who's very free market, it actually doesn't bother me if I'm using a free service and they're serving up ads, and like that's kind of okay. Where I get nervous about it is I know damn well this is not completely isolated and separated from the government or politics or any kind of other agendas. And it's like, if you're just trying to sell me a white picket fence, I might be fine with that.
Exactly. That makes it. I love algorithms for when I'm like, because you find coupons and everything when you were about to buy something, but I don't get to turn that off, not easily, and it's always listening. And you wonder, I've had my phone next to me during this whole entire conversation. Am I going to be, who is flagging what I say? This sounds ridiculous, but several of my friends are on the watch list because of their involvement. But they were involved in a video or in something like that. Not criminals, haven't done anything illegal, but wound up on a watch list. Well, how long before the technology allows that watch list to be half the country, where they're eavesdropping on
or
everything?
the entire country? Like if you're in China, you're kind of on the watch list by default because you're a Chinese citizen, right? So, like, and that was one of the things that Snowden revealed, was that the mass collection, and the way that they justified it morally was, well, we're collecting all that. Now, a lot of it was metadata, which sounds like it's not really important because it's not actually, but you can tell a lot. Trust me, as a former crypto security guy, traffic analysis can tell you a hell of a lot about someone. So there's a lot of metadata there that they're collecting, and they just do it generally. And how they justify it is, well, we're not going to look without following the proper procedures and getting a warrant. It's just there. So when we need to look, so if we decide Chase Matheson is a problem, and we go to a secret court and we get a warrant, we have 20 years worth of all of his stuff that we've collected in this trove of
and we know exactly what kind of
eavesdropping. Yes,
we know what kind of toilet paper he wipes his butt with, and that's and it's intrusive, and I think that they're now literally looking at every aspect of that. I had some friends who investigated a sheriff locally about 5 years ago. And somehow someone at the sheriff, either through a warrant or through calling someone at Facebook, got access to their Facebook messages, their private Facebook messages, under the guise of child pornography. There was obviously no child. It was because they were investigating the sheriff. So how, who have you reported on that you've made mad, that is now reading every one of your messages, waiting for you to make a joke that they can take out of context? Do I think it's there right now? Very rarely, maybe but in 10 years, shoot, they'll have an AI bot that does it for them.
Yeah. I mean, Moore's law is to their advantage, right? That processing power is getting faster, storage is getting cheaper. Eventually, collecting everything that everyone says all the time about everything becomes feasible. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess not everyone technically, but you can build an AI bot to listen and decide what to throw away, what to discard and what to keep. So yeah, it's one of those things that's pretty concerning to me, and I don't really know how to push back on it, because I don't think no one seems to care. I mean, people care when you talk about it.
They like the white picket fence ads way too much.
Yeah,
it's way too convenient. But
so I don't know, man. Look, we will come back. Let's come back and talk about some other crazy stuff at another show. Absolutely. But thank you so much for joining. Remind people one last time where they can find you.
Thanks for having me. PatriotPunkNetwork.com, Telegram Minds at Patriot Punk Network, Twitter at Real Patriot Punk. So yeah, thanks again for having me on, Carter. I appreciate what you guys do. And yeah, look forward to being on again soon.
We will have you back for sure, man. Take care.
Maybe I'll have the mohawk up next time.
Excellent. All right. Goodbye, everyone. We'll see you next time. Thanks for sticking around until the end. If you're new to Unsafe Space, check out our deep content library that includes discussions with everyone from James Lindsay to Brett Weinstein. And please consider helping to fund our work by visiting unsafespace.com/donate. You can find us on a variety of social media platforms, and you can find a community of like-minded individuals on our Unsafe Space Discord server, which is open to financial supporters at any level. We hope to see you there.
Warning. This is an unsafe space. Dangerous ideas have been detected. The content of this production may corrupt previous psychological programming. If you encounter any of the following individuals, please administer government-issued neurotoxin immediately. I'm not sure what the neurotoxin will do because I am not a biologist. CRT is a complex legal theory that is needed to combat the epidemic of racist babies. If you think about it, no one should be allowed to express opinions. But don't. Think about it, I mean. That's not your job. Thinking has been scientifically proven to be less efficient than compliance. Science, scientific, and scientifically are registered trademarks of the World Economic Forum. Unauthorized use is prohibited. Computer voice courtesy. Never mind, that last line is fake news. Please disregard it and return to your safe space immediately. There will be cake.